So Jesus is therefore led away towards Golgotha. And of course, we know about then this guy Simon of Cyrene. Before we just talk about Simon of Cyrene, let's get there's Simon around 8 a.m. He's heading off. I just want to make a quick comment on Golgotha. It's called the place of the skull, Golgotha. But you'll notice that the Hebrew name Golgotha is actually it looks kind of similar to the old Hebrew name Gilgal. Do you remember Gilgal, which actually is a place of several places in the Old Testament? Gilgal is a stone circle. It's actually the same etymology. Gilgal becomes Golgotha. It's just a slightly different sounding ending, and it's gone into Aramaic now. So how does a stone circle, a circle of stones, just like you get a Stonehenge, which are often used in the ancient world to mark significant points, how does a circle of stones end up as the place of a skull? And the simple thing is that a ball shape and a circle, flat circle, aren't distinguished. They're both the same shape. And a stone is a gill, because gill is also a round thing. So a stone is a kind of a round thing, and if it's a round stone and actually it's a round bone, the skull is actually a round bone. You see the kind of the way that the logic goes. So the place of the skull, Golgotha, Golgotha is also the Gilgal, as like it was. Now, why is that significant? Well, because Gilgal as a significant place is becomes synonymous, or not synonymous, not totally synonymous. It's commonly used in the Old Testament as the place of circumcision. That the first Gilgal, when Joshua comes into the Promised Land, they set up the circle of stones, and they all circumcise there. And without wanting to be too graphic, the idea of circling around with a stone, so circumcision, we even have the circum in the cision, a cut around, it was made with a sharp stone. And in the ancient mind, all of these things are kind of coming together. So there's a cutting off of the flesh at Gilgal. Now, it's not the same place as Golgotha. It's got there by different reasons, but the etymology, the idea of the place of cutting off of the flesh is tied up with the name. So it's not something you regularly see, because the New Testament doesn't spell it out for you. But actually, as you put the kind of the etymology of the name, the place name, together with the use of that place name in its original form in the Old Testament, you see prophetically how Jesus is going away for his crucifixion, which Paul writes about as being the circumcision of the whole flesh, to that place which often was the name given to the location where there was a ceremonial circumcision that would happen. And it's because of the cutting around, the cutting stone. So as he's heading there, of course, is where we read of Simon of Cyrene, who gets asked to carry his cross. Jesus is weakened by the flogging he's had. So they led him away. He went out bearing the cross to a place called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is Golgotha. As they came out, they found, or compelled, or grabbed a man of Cyrene, passing by, coming up from the country, Simon by name, the father of Alexander and Rufus, and they compelled him to go with them, that he might carry or bear the cross, and laid it on him, the cross, to carry it after Jesus. Now, it's interesting that if we kind of... where are we? Yeah, so this man, Simon, it says actually Simon by name. Simon should be in black, not in purple. If you remember, black is when it appears in more than one gospel, because Simon actually appears in more than one gospel. He appears actually in some way or other, where he appears in all three of the synoptic gospels, described at certain different levels of kind of clarity. And particularly in... It's true probably in all of the Gospels, is when a character is specifically named or highlighted, and in this case we even know he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. It's almost certainly because in the genre of ancient literature which they're writing, which is autobiographical kind of history, the naming of people and clarifying of who they are is so that they can be checked with as eyewitnesses. So what we can say about Simon is he's known to the early church. And not only is he known to the early church, he's known in three of the synoptic gospels, all bother to name him in some way or other. So Simon, who's the father of Alexander and Rufus, and he's Simon who comes from Cyrene. So he's qualified in two different ways, if you think about it. His sons and the place he comes from. And so, here we go, yeah. So he's named in all of the Synoptic Gospels. It implies in different ways that, first of all, he's known in the Jerusalem church. I say see Matthew, because if you've done any of the teaching things I've done where we look at the development of the Gospels and the New Testament, the early church all unequivocal that Matthew was written first, right at the beginning of things. And it's written in Hebrew because at the time the church is centered around Jerusalem. So actually in that context, seeing as he's named in Matthew, probably because he's known in the Jerusalem church. His wife and children then are named as being in Rome by Paul in Romans. But we'll come to Romans in a second. But equally, Mark actually is the one who clarifies and says he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Mark's gospel, according to the early church, of course, is written when Peter is in Rome, or just after Peter's been in Rome, after Peter leaves Rome, by Mark, who's also in Rome, for a Roman audience. And so it would seem at this point, and kind of joined with the reference that is made in Romans 16 by Paul, who greets Rufus and his mother, who are there in Rome, and he lists them as people who are there working in Rome. It seems, therefore, that Simon and his family have become kind of quite significant figures within the early church. So named by Paul, probably named the children named because they're there in Rome by Mark when he's writing his gospel. Children aren't named in Matthew because he's in Jerusalem and the key person who was Simon. But he's also named, of course, by Luke, who's actually Lucius of Cyrene, who we read about in Acts 13, the early church tell us. So Luke is actually also a Jew from Cyrene. And we're told, of course, that there were men of Cyrene, and Luke only ever tells us about two men from Cyrene, himself and Simon of Cyrene, who've gone up, and men of Cyprus along with them, who'd gone up to Antioch and spoke to the Hellenists and preached the Lord Jesus. So how we put it all together, and it's not, you can't be 100% conclusive, but what it looks like is that this figure who gets drawn into the Jesus story, he may be there because the Orthodox Church lists Alexander and Rufus as being part of the 72. So it's possible that the sons are already followers of Jesus. We're going to see later this evening about the acquaintances who are at the cross, which probably includes some of the 72. The 12 have fled because they were with Jesus when he was arrested. They've gone, apart from John. But Jesus' wider acquaintances, maybe Rufus is there because actually he already has family members who are following Jesus. Although he comes from Cyrene, when we read about the book of Acts, we hear that there are men from all over the empire who live and have property, which is true. So lots of the diasporan Jews have kind of properties and have some of the time where they spend living in Jerusalem. So if his family have already got involved to some degree with the Jesus movement, he is perhaps in the crowds because as them being based in Jerusalem, they're picking up what's going on. And they're there even though the disciples aren't. And so they get pulled in. And so as a result, all three of the Synoptic Gospels make reference to him. It seems that he, his two sons and his wife are all involved in the early Christian movement. So it just kind of gives you a little bit more on the possibilities or fullness of the character. The old approach, which is really just not taken seriously nowadays, is the kind of that somehow there was some random reason why some characters were named and others weren't. It was only in the 1980s that for the first time people started to look at the Gospels and do kind of computerized analysis of the Gospels compared with other genres of literature. And we can say really without doubt that all of the Gospels are written in slightly different ways, but they all have autobiographical history. Not autobiographical, they all have biographical history to them. And they write in very similar styles. And one of the key elements of that is the names, the people you name are the people that you could easily trace down or go and find to verify things with. So it helps explain those things. So anyways, Jesus is led away. Simon of Cyrene carries the cross. And and a great multitude of people followed him. This is actually taken, I've jumped ahead a little bit, but just to kind of show you, I think, no, this isn't yet. It's not jumping ahead yet. This is still in the flow. The people followed him, including the women who had mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves." So he refers to them as daughters of Jerusalem. So they're probably not all, it's not just the Galilean women here. There are others. It's even possible, as we've just talked about, that Simon of Cyrene's wife is there. But weep and for your children. But behold, the days are coming in which they will say, "Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore us, the breasts that never nursed." And then they will begin to tell the mountains, "Fall on us," tell the hills, "Cover us." For if they do these things in the green tree, what will be done in the dry? And that final statement it is kind of it's an odd way of, for us, it sounds odd in our ears, but really it's just kind of saying this is being done not at a time when actually Israel is in real pressure. They're actually in a period of relative peace at the moment. But in that context, it's often in the place of peace that the worst elements of who we are kind of creep out and they turn against Jesus. And actually, given what I've just been saying, you see, about the family of Simon of Cyrene, and maybe if his wife's in the crowd, and actually his sons have even been those who are the children who follow Jesus, and so that you can even kind of have a sense of Jesus's words landing on someone who's actually struggling with what's going on, whose sons have started to follow Jesus, whose father is suddenly getting co-opted. The father's suddenly getting co-opted into the process. The mother is there, who's going to be named by Paul, struggling with what's going on, and there's a kind of sense in which Jesus' words probably have a relevance to her in that context. More than just, well, why does he say it like this? Well, because there are real people listening. So then Jesus, of course, gets crucified. We could spend the whole evening just doing these verses, so I do apologise at the speed we're running through these significant verses. There were also 2 criminals led out with him to be put to death. And they brought him, and they came to the place that's called Golgotha. Just so you know, look, I can also put that there so you can still see me then. Place called Golgotha, which is interpreted as the place of the skull. They came to the place called the skull. They crucified him, and with him 2 others. The criminals were on the right, and on the other on the left. On either side, one, and Jesus in the middle. So at the cross, we then read, there were also many women who were watching from afar, who had followed Jesus from Galilee. So we've talked about some of those already, among whom were both Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less and of Joses, and Salome the mother of the sons of Zebedee, who when he was in Galilee followed him and served him, and many other women came up with him to Jerusalem. And then you notice that all his acquaintances and the women who followed with him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. And that little word acquaintances is really interesting because, of course, when the Gospels mean apostles, they say apostles. When they mean disciples, they say disciples. And here it doesn't have either of them. There's just John. So you can't say all his disciples are there or even all the apostles. And actually, as time is going to go on, we're going to suddenly see that it's perhaps these acquaintances who become this new wave of apostles because they are commissioned by the resurrected Jesus to carry the message. But actually, within that mix of acquaintances, there's probably family members. There are probably members of the 72, as we've touched on here. You can see a hint of them potentially. While we can't be 100%, we can see these little inferences that help kind of put it into place. So there's, as I say, there's Mary, Mrs. Clopas. So I've mentioned this as we've gone through, but I've just thought the Expositions of the Saying of the Lord by Papias document, and Papias lived from 70 to 163 AD. And we don't have his original, but we have his words recorded to us by Eusebius, I think it is. Yes, so it says up there, Papias and Hegesippus from the 2nd century are quoted by Eusebius for telling us that Clopas is the brother of Jesus' earthly father Joseph, and so Mrs. Clopas, Mary of Clopas, therefore is of course an aunt. And they actually become a key pair in the resurrection events as individuals. They actually also sort of then become parents to the early church. They don't just appear in Luke's gospel, they're also in Mark's gospel. So they're not named in Mark's gospel in the same way, but the events that they're involved in play out. So while Jesus is on the cross, it's 9 a.m. now. We know that because we're told in the Synoptic Gospels. So he's crucified at around 9, so it's about 9. And Jesus speaks from the cross. Now, crucifixion is actually it's painful in multiple different ways. It sounds like it's stating the obvious. It crushes the lungs. It dislocates the bones because the weight is kind of done in the way. I'm just trying to remember if I don't think I was thinking I might have put a little diagram to show the kind of the dynamics of crucifixion, but I don't think I put them into this presentation. But the knees are bent, and a little ledge is there which you can sort of hold yourself onto if you can, but it takes energy to lift yourself onto the bench. If you're on the bench, your arms then are not under so much pressure, but as you slip off, your body weight falls and jerks the arms out of the socket. It's been physiologically kind of estimated that the arm length will actually grow by quite a few inches through crucifixion because of the dislocation of the bones, which of course is something that you hear in Psalm 23 when it talks, not 23, 22. It talks about all my bones are out of joint. So crucifixion hurts the bones in that way. It crushes the lungs because the weight is held, the rib cage pushes in, which is why you have to try and lift yourself back up onto the little ledge. Beyond that, as well as because Jesus has been whipped. Interestingly, he models. He's got wounds on his head, so the top spur of the cross gets blood on it. He has nails through his hands, so the two spurs on either side, and through his feet, so the bottom spur. Of course, you read about the atonement sacrifice. It talks about blood being daubed onto the 4 horns of the altar, with all the spurs of the altar. The Hebrew word could be the spurs of the altar. So each spur has blood marked onto it, and then it says the rest gets poured out at the base of the altar. And of course, his blood is draining away from him, and the loss of blood actually then causes new levels of pain because you get hyper dehydration. So it's not like dehydration from getting thirsty. As the blood drains away, water is diverted. There's various systems start to shut down to divert water to turn into blood, to become part of the blood, to kind of keep the blood pressure up. And so you get extreme pain in the various kind of extremities and organs that you wouldn't necessarily think of as water is diverted from them into the body. Now, in saying that, just to understand how horrible crucifixion is, but you also see something in the statements from the cross. At the beginning, Jesus is able to speak relatively freely. As time goes on, his statements become more punctuated, and that makes sense of the physiology of what goes on with the cross. In the early stages, it's about a slow draining process. So at the early stages, Jesus has more physical energy, even though his body is in pain. As time goes on, it becomes harder and harder to breathe. To actually breathe, you have to lift your body weight up so that you can exhale, because to exhale, you can only be done when the lungs aren't being compressed. So as time goes on, Jesus' statements from the cross will get shorter and shorter. But as we kind of work our way through them, then there's the first statement that's made, which is a famous one, of course: Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. During this, we hear about the rulers sneering, soldiers mocking, they're casting lots for garments. All of these things which we find prophesied in the Old Testament. We haven't probably got time tonight we haven't really, to think about all of the way they're places they're from. The priests then go to the temple because they need to actually get back to their normal work, so they leave at a certain point. It's possible that Judas tries to return his money at that point, because it talks about him throwing it into the temple. So maybe once the priests have gone back, that happens. So Jesus said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. The people stood watching. The rulers were with him. They scoffed at him. They saying, he saved others, let him save himself. If this is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming to him, offering him vinegar, sour wine mixed with myrrh or gall to drink, which Jesus, of course, refuses. If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. when he tasted it, he wouldn't drink any more of it, wouldn't take any more. Then the soldiers, when they crucified Jesus, took his garments. They made 4 parts for every soldier a part, and also the coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. And then they said to one another, let's not tear that, but cast lots for it to decide whose it will be. So they parted his garments among them, and casting lots on them, what each should take, that the scripture might be fulfilled, they parted my garments among them. Again, Psalm 22. For my cloak they cast lots. So the soldiers did these things. And it was the 3rd hour. So the 3rd hour here, unlike the 6th hour in John, is measuring using a kind of Jewish way, which is from dawn. So dawn, if you think of it, around 5 to 6, it's probably at this stage it's probably around 9. So they crucified him. They sat and watched him. Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, King of the Jews. They set it over his head as a superscription of his accusations, written in letters in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Jesus of Nazareth, this is the King of the Jews. Sometimes you will see the kind of a little thing, where it shows that if you write in Hebrew, the first letter makes the name Yahweh. It's kind of nice. I don't think it doesn't quite work because it's slightly kind of it doesn't say exactly what the Gospels tell us it says. We normally add, they've normally written Jesus, Yeshua. The of Nazareth is written Ha Nazarene, the Nazarene, the Ha being the H of Yahweh, yeah, and then the Yod, they've added the word and, so it's Jesus the Nazarene and the King, so another of the Jews. So it's a little bit kind of contrived. It's not actually what's said. But he writes it there. There's an irony in it. You said he was the king, so I'll call him the king. This is what the Jews' king looks like. And of course, they don't like it. So many of the Jews read it for the place where Jesus was crucified, and they said, "Don't write the King of the Jews," but said, "I am the King of the Jews." And he says, "I've written what I've written." So he got a little mark there, the 3rd hour. As time goes on, Jesus makes a second statement. There are 2 robbers they crucified with him. One is right, one is left, so that the scripture might be fulfilled. He was numbered with transgressors. And those who passed by were blaspheming, wagging their heads. You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down. Likewise, the chief priests are mocking, and so on. So the robbers were crucified with him, insulted him, and cast lots on him in the same reproach. But one of the criminals who was hanged, insulting him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answered, rebuking, "Don't you even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation, and we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. This man's done nothing wrong." And he said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Assuredly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Giving one of those little statements that causes all sorts of argument and controversy. I'm not going to try and address it now, as to whether he's in paradise on that same day or what happens about the resurrection day in the future and so on, or judgment day in the future. I think my simple solution is eternity doesn't kind of work quite the same way as time does in our context. So you can come up with various ways of solving that, but just there is that kind of wonderful promise in the moment. Things are never too late. You know what I mean? So it's a second statement. And then there was standing by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. So although we only have a handful of words, the interaction seems to be that Jesus is communicating to John that he doesn't want his mother to see his end. And John somehow gets that and understands the context. Now remember, Salome here is the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So she's John's mother. She's there. She's also probably Mary's sister or sister-in-law. I say probably or possibly. She's known Mary for some time, for sure. Because Jesus, even before his public ministry had started, we read about how he and his mother and his brothers had all stayed for a while in Capernaum. And the context of the people they know are probably James and John at that context. So there's a bit of a relationship there. And that's interesting because we'll notice that Salome disappears from the narrative at the cross at this point. So she's there at the moment. Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene, his mother's sister. There you go. Yeah. So his mother's sister, which could be Salome, is there as well. So John at that point takes her into his own home, and of course traditionally we understand that he kind of becomes almost her son. That may or may not be the case. Obviously, she has other children. Jesus has brothers and sisters and so on. But the key thing I think here is that John recognises he wants her to take his mother away and take her actually to somewhere else, rather than to watch his final hours, which are going to be very ugly and very painful. And while Jesus still has enough kind of energy, it will always be traumatic. But John takes John and his mother Salome take Mary back then to John's house before Jesus dies. And at that point, then darkness falls for about 3 hours after John and Salome and Mary have left. So during that process of we have a fourth statement from Jesus on the cross. This is not covered by John's gospel because obviously John has just left at this point. So we've just got it in Matthew, Mark and Luke. So it's about the 6th hour. When the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. The sun was darkened. At about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted as, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of them who stood there heard it and said, behold, this man is calling Elijah. Of course, Jesus quotes Psalm 22, the opening verses, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which, of course, draws our attention to it. And actually, as you unpack it, you see how much of the cross experience is actually kind of spelt out in those chapters. You can spend a whole evening just looking at Psalm 22. So we won't try and squeeze it into the next 5 minutes. Let's put it that way. But hopefully you're aware of those passages. Then John comes back. We know that because he's going to start recording things again. He's not recorded that little moment of Jesus crying out. He's now hasn't got Mary. Salome's not there. Salome doesn't come into the narrative around the cross again. She'll be there at the resurrection. So John is a witness again to what's going to happen next. So Jesus' final words then from the cross. I call them final words rather than numbering them because it's difficult to know exactly how they all come together. They kind of all probably happen in the same moment, but kind of issued as gasps as he lifts his weight so that he can exhale, and because you have to exhale obviously to speak. So when Jesus had received vinegar, so they lift up vinegar to him, he said, "It's finished." And Jesus cried again with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he bowed his head and breathed his last, and yielded up his spirit. I think there was supposed to be another bit of text there, which I've obviously left out, but I'm sure you can work it out. So I'm going to kind of go back and review that, because in Acts 2, when Peter's preaching, he talks about there are signs in the sky above and on the earth below. We've sort of covered that during this period. Because actually, at this stage, we then read, "Behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. The earth quaked and the rocks were split." So the two things are actually relevant. They kind of go together. The tombs were open. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised and coming out of the tombs. They entered the holy city and appeared to many. So this is a sign on the earth below. It's kind of a rocky sign. And when the centurion who stood opposite him to where he was watching Jesus saw that he'd cried out like this and breathed his last, and they saw the earthquake and the things that were done, and they feared exceedingly but glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man. Truly this man was a son of God." All the multitudes that came together to see him when they saw these things that were done returned home beating their breasts. But just to kind of focus on that first earthquake kind of moment. There you go. Here's the earthquake. We know there was an earthquake. So earthquakes, you can actually see them. The sediment around the Dead Sea actually highlights when you have an earthquake. And actually, if you look at the little picture there, you can see event C and event B. There are, you can hopefully see them. The lines are kind of less regular, less even. They've been mixed up. So event B is actually a well-known earthquake that happened. It's recorded. You find it in the records in 31 BC. It's roughly 60 years or so before the event C, which is marked on there. So we know that about the earthquake because it appears in the ancient records in 31 BC. The only reference to an earthquake that happens roughly 60 years later. The reason you say roughly is because the trouble is when it all mixes up, you get about a 10-year spread, gets all crushed into one. So you can't say exactly what year. It's kind of over a period of time, some point around here. The only reference we have to an earthquake is here in Matthew's Gospel. So it's unknown. Event C would be unknown apart from Matthew's Gospel, which occurs between 26 and 34 AD. So I think about 33 as we're putting it together. So we know there is an earthquake, just as Matthew tells us. And that earthquake seems to have dislodged part of the stone lintel which the veil in the temple was hung from. And actually in dislodging part of that stone lintel, the heavy stone lintel pulls and probably rip the cloth. So rather than it being kind of, if you like, someone's hands getting it and ripping, it's actually that part of the heavy lintel kind of falls and the curtain gets ripped. So yeah, that's in the mix. And there's also a big, here you go, I'll say that there's also some level of dust storm. We know that this is the season for dust storms because we hear about the darkness that covers the land. Now, normally when you have darkness covering the land, it's not complicated because you've got dust all everywhere, so everything goes dark. But in the right atmospheric conditions, you get a kind of a bubble of air, and the dust storm kind of goes above the bubble. So if you're on the ground, you're not feeling the dust, but it's still having the impact of cutting the light off. The photo there is actually in Jerusalem at the right season of the year. It's just a normal dust storm though, but you can see it kind of blocking out the sunlight. So there seems to be something, as I say in Acts, it talks about signs on the earth and in the heavens above. So there's a sign there's an earthquake. There's this kind of dust storm that creates a layer of dark above the ground. We actually have a well-known description of exactly this happening from an archaeologist who's working in Egypt. But in the same season, when you get these Scirocco dust clouds, dust storms, but he describes this process where, so there's no wind, the sun was as bright as usual in the cloudless sky. Suddenly a gloom was cast over everything. In a few minutes, it was actually pitch darkness. So he's describing this same kind of event, this event where the dust storm is above the people who are on the ground. So it seems that something like that has happened at the same time, and it's therefore feeds in as one of those signs. And then, of course, there is also a lunar eclipse. Now, that's not mentioned in the Gospels, but it is mentioned in the book of Acts, where Peter is speaking. He's talking about signs. He talks about the moon will be turned to blood, as you yourselves know. Because in actual fact, in 33 AD, on Friday the 15th of Nisan AD 33, which is the very day we're talking about, using the official temple calendar, there's a lunar eclipse that is visible from Jerusalem. So at 6:20, the moon rose over the Mount of Olives and starts shading itself blood red. So it shades dark to light red from the top bottom to the bottom right, and the red effect finishes at about 11 minutes past 7. Now I put there that those results were actually published in 1983 in Nature magazine, which is obviously the chief sort of scientific journal for natural sciences. It was actually done by a Christian astronomer. I'm going to call him astronomer. But his work on lunar eclipses proved to be so incredibly accurate. If you look through history, all of the ones that were marked as going red, because it's easy to predict when there's going to be a lunar eclipse, but does it go red or not, and how does the red affect it? He did the maths to kind of work out how red a lunar eclipse would be. And so they actually published these results. It's another reason why I think the 33 AD is a good fit. So we've had all three. We've had a blood and red moon, we've had an earthquake, we've had darkness, and we understand all of those things fit within the kind of natural phenomena of the world. Their timing is what's remarkable here. They all come together in a way as signs about what's going on. We've already looked at this verse. I just put it back here as a kind of quick reminder of the women that are there at the cross, because we're going to be setting ourselves up. So Jesus is dying just as the Passover lambs are slain, because it's the day of preparation. So Jesus' death then is confirmed. Just keep an eye on the time. So that the bodies wouldn't remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a special one. They asked the Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away. You remember those lambs that are being sacrificed at the temple at this moment have to be sacrificed with no broken bones to be valid. Therefore the soldiers came to break the legs of the first and of the other one who was crucified. But when they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. They didn't break his legs. However, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified. This testimony is true, and knows he tells the truth, that you may believe. In other words, John is saying, I saw this happen. And interestingly, because it is one of those little scientific tie-ins, that it tells you. So as you lose blood, as the blood drains because of the blood loss from the whipping that Jesus would have taken, the shredding up of his back with the Roman flagellum, as he has lost fluid, the heart starts to beat faster to try and keep blood pressure up as the blood pressure is dropping, till it hits around 200 beats per minute, at which point it's beating so fast that the pericardium around the heart is getting irritated, and it starts to fill up with fluid, so clear fluid rather than blood, until eventually your heart just gives out. And so actually then as the spear goes in and pierces it, it hits the pericardium first, which releases what looks like water, clear fluid, and then into the heart, and so the last vestiges of the red blood. And so in this little kind of testimony that John gives, because he was there testifying, this is exactly how I saw it, we actually have something that ties in it ties in a modern science way, what actually just in the same way as we saw when Jesus sweated blood, we suddenly now understand exactly what his body has gone through in a way that makes sense to the modern mind. That the scriptures might be fulfilled, a bone of him will not be broken. And again, another scripture says they'll look on him whom they pierced. And here he is looking on and giving us that testimony. So Jesus, after that confirmation of Jesus' death, the high priest momentarily lose focus and they get distracted with their own Passover preparations. At which point then Joseph of Arimathea kind of spot an opportunity and they step forward to request Jesus' body from Pilate. So they take possession of the body, but it's very short time left because before nightfall, before evening comes. So they decide to use a nearby new tomb that's owned by Joseph. So they do a hasty job securing basic spices. They get a lot of them. The myrrh is about 6 years worth of value. It's a huge amount of myrrh and aloes. It's not particularly sophisticated, but they just pack it all in. They wrap the body, put it into the tomb. It's been estimated that the smell of myrrh would have gone out for about 2 or more miles. You'd have just been able to smell it. It's fascinating as well that the temple is actually built on Mount Moriah, and Moriah actually is the Hebrew for myrrh of God. Moriah. It's the same word, myrrh, and it's God's myrrh. So we normally think of it as God's bitterness, because myrrh is bitter. It's the same idea. It's the spice is called bitterness, but it's also myrrh. So actually the temple and where Jesus is crucified is in the mountains of Moriah, of God's myrrh. It's his bitterness because of what's gone on, but actually even symbolically there's this huge amount of myrrh and aloes that are bought as Jesus is first put into the tomb. So they take the body. When evening had come, because it was preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath, behold, a rich man named Joseph, who was a prominent member of the council, a good and righteous man, who had not consented to the council and their deeds, from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who was himself also waiting or looking for the kingdom of God. This Joseph of Arimathea, who himself was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, boldly went into Pilate and asked Pilate if he might take away Jesus' body. Pilate marvelled that Jesus was already dead, and summoning the centurion, asked if he'd been dead long. And when he found out from the centurion, Pilate gave permission and grants the body to Joseph and commanded the body to be given up. So Joseph bought linen cloth, taking him, he wrapped him in the clean linen cloth and took the body away. And Nicodemus, who first came to Jesus, came also bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds. So they took Jesus' body, bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as was the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where they crucified him there was a garden. In the garden there was a new tomb, which no man had yet been laid, because it was the Doomsday of preparation. The Sabbath was drawing near. See, I put it's around 5 o'clock now. The tomb was near at hand. They laid Jesus in there, in his, i.e. Joseph's, new tomb, which he had cut out in the rock, and no one had ever lain in there. So at that point, Mary, Jesus' aunt, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, they all follow to see where Jesus is being taken. So Joanna and Susanna actually go into the tomb to help arrange the body, but the other two don't. So Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, the mother of Joseph, sitting opposite the tomb. So they're sitting outside. They saw where it was laid. The other women, who are have more likely even that they're known to Joseph and Nicodemus, who are very wealthy individuals, as we thought. They may even be part of the same Gurion family. So the third richest family around. Obviously, Joanna and her friend Susanna, we know at least of Joanna, her husband is the finance minister. So again, very kind of high powered. So they take the initiative and go right into the tomb. The other women who come with him out of Galilee followed and saw the tomb and saw how his body was laid. In other words, they didn't just see where it was, they actually saw how it was all arranged inside. And he, i.e. Joseph, rolled a great stone against the door of the tomb and departed. Probably had servants to do it with him, of course. And the four women conferred. So they agree that the body's not adequately tended, even though it's got a lot of spices and so on. So they agree to return as soon as the Sabbath is over, which is as soon as they can, because obviously they can't do too much now. So they returned and prepared spices and ointments. We notice that's said by Luke. And that's not a problem for Joanna and Susanna, because they're going back to the Hasmonean palace and they will have spices and ointments there. The other women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Clopas, and even Mary, Jesus' mother, and others and so on, they won't have access to spices just like that. They will have to wait for the markets to reopen. And of course it's Sabbath now, so they're not going to be open. But on the Sabbath they all have to rest according to the commandment. So Joanna and Susanna therefore returned to the Hasmonean palace, where they may have had access to spices. So we actually read in Luke, then they went back and prepared spices and perfumes, because they can do it straight away. Mary, who's Jesus' aunt, takes Mary Magdalene back to John's house, because it's too late for her to go back to Bethany at this point, where there's also going to be Salome and Jesus' mother there as well. So I think, oh, there we go. There's the sun in the sky. The blood moon is right up there at the moment. And this is the point where, as I say, I had 2 more slides after here, but for some reason I can't seem to play them. It just disappears, goes to the end of slideshow. So hang on, let's go back to here. I'll just talk to you like this. So we've now we kind of come to the end of this evening. We'll leave things here. So we're going to, so obviously in the last week we're going to actually follow the story in quite some detail, as the women who have taken time to see what's going on. We're going to see they all actually behave according to the things that we've already been told about them, in terms of whether they've got spices or don't have spices, what time they leave, when they leave, and so on and so forth. So we'll leave things there, and it is, oh, look at that, it's spot on 9 o'clock. Does anybody want to ask any questions at this stage, or make any comments, or ask for any clarification?